listen, if you're not paying yourself, that's not sustainable. If your business isn't making money, that's not sustainable. And one day, eventually, you're going to have to close your business and then you're not helping anyone. And sometimes you have to say the hard things to be able to hear it and to say, I don't want that to happen. Okay, let's create a better plan and let's really take care of people where you are right now. And it may not look like exactly what you want, and we may have to scale some things back. And that's why I always say, start small.
Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. As always, I'm Chris of Leadership Potential, where I believe in ending accidental leadership. And you'll notice I'm not joined by my co-host today. Lucie is out today, so we'll miss her. But we are in for a really cool treat today, just because I'm in a bunch of groups where her expertise will really be useful. And I think she's just such a pleasant and fun person. I feel a little bad because we forgot what we were originally going to talk about, but because we were just so engrossed in our conversation that we just had a great time chatting and catching up and all that stuff. I'm a little starstruck because Ashley, our guest today, is a little bit of a celebrity. Her knowledge, experience has been featured in SHRM, in Lattice, in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in ABC News. Ashley is the real deal. She's worked with everything from startups to multi-million international companies, and she's just grown so passionate about women business owners, and in particular, women in the field of law, and how they can develop businesses that they're excited about, especially when you start working with other people and leading other people. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. What an introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'm sorry Lucie couldn't join us, but shout out. We miss you, but we're going to have a great conversation. I was really excited to reconnect today and share what we were chatting about before we hit record with the audience today.
Yeah. So before we do that, tell me, were you, as young 9-year-old Ashley, were you super passionate about, I want to help women business owners? Or how did you grow into that?
No, I was not. I was definitely going to be like a princess fighter pilot. So that was
Great.
where my career started. It did not really grow much from that particular standpoint, but I've always been someone who is really passionate about my community, about like shopping local and supporting local businesses. And over the years, even when I worked in a corporate job, I would always look for those small local mom and pop shops. And especially as I started to grow as a leader in my own career, I would look to those businesses that were run and owned by women as inspiration and would really make an effort to support those businesses and tell people about them. And so that's kind of where this love for women business owners grew. And I actually started a photography business before I ever started my HR consulting business. So that was my first introduction to online businesses and all of the amazing things that women especially were out there doing. And the more questions I got about HR and leadership, the more people were like, maybe you should start that kind of business, because I spent the first 10 years of my corporate career in HR and leadership. So it's kind of just been a little bit of an evolution and a journey. And I'm always open to saying yes to new possibilities and experiences. And that's how I find myself here today.
And what drew you to women, in particular business owners, as opposed to any other category of people?
I think really my personal experience as a woman in leadership. I started very young, right out of college, in my first leadership role, and it was nothing like what you learned in college. There was a lot of theory. And interestingly, people don't act like the theories. They have their own personality quirks and their own, curiosities that they bring into every situation. And I'm forever fascinated by people, why they do what they do, why they show up the way they show up. But as a young leader, as a woman in a very male-dominated industry, I was often told, you're too compassionate, you're too empathetic, you're going to be a doormat. Nobody's ever going to take you seriously. You're never going to be able to lead a team effectively. And that really kind of started my career in going, I don't have to lead like you. I can do this a different way. And I think we need that, because I was getting a really good response from my team members who were like, wow, nobody's ever cared for me like this. Nobody's ever taken the time to listen. Nobody's ever sat and brainstormed different things that I could do to show up better at work or show up differently or deal with the challenges that I'm struggling with. And so I really started to get passionate about women in leadership, thinking, have other women been told the same things? Are they believing those things about themselves, about their leadership? And what if we pushed back against that status quo and we embrace the concept of we can be compassionate and empathetic and still be effective leaders? And as a matter of fact, maybe even more effective in our leadership, because now we're not inspiring through fear, but we're inspiring through care and concern.
Yeah, let's dive into that more later. I'd love to see that balance. What's interesting is, growing up, my dad was gone a lot, so it was mainly my mom. Like, she wasn't a single mom, but essentially she was, because my dad was just gone a lot. I went to the therapy field, so I mostly, like, my entire career is around women mostly, and then HR. I've only ever had one male boss my entire life. Of all jobs I've ever held, one male boss. So I
Interesting.
found that super interesting. For women, what do you think is unique about the challenges that women are facing as leaders?
Yeah, I think the first is really kind of ties into what you were explaining, Chris, and it's the fact that most of us have not had strong female influences in our work experiences. A lot of us have only worked for male bosses or very masculine women who've had to fight tooth and nail and claw to get to where they are. And I remember clearly being in corporate leadership going, I don't want to be that woman. Like, that felt so dissonant with who I am as a human that I was like, I don't think I can change my entire personality. And something I tell my clients a lot of the time is, I don't want you to have to come into work every day and put armor on. I want you to be able to come into work and be who you are, be who you were meant to be. And if that's soft, or if that's tough, or if that's compassionate, or if that's, passionately aggressive towards your goals, whatever that looks like femininity doesn't have to look like one thing, but it gets to look like a combination of our personality traits. So another thing that I find really challenging for especially a lot of small businesses is that the team members that we tend to hire initially are friends, family, close colleagues. And so that creates an interpersonal dynamic that is quite challenging versus hiring a stranger off the street. So we start to tell ourselves, we kind of create rules or boundaries around how we can talk to these people. And it's usually not in very healthy ways.
I'm just curious also, just like the cultural component, right? Because if you grew up from a different country, and you're trying to assimilate to, like, we're here in the US, so it's largely Western culture, but we have people from all over the place and we have different ages. How have you seen that kind of play in, as well as like different fields, right? Like law and engineering, science, those are very much more technical, so the more logical kind of fields, versus something like therapy, which is much more right brain and, feelings and emotions based. How are you seeing all those differences interplay with women in leadership?
Yeah, so much of that comes into consideration. I was just talking to a client earlier who is a first generation immigrant from Russia, and her personality is very different than that of her team. And so some of the conflict that she's dealing with right now within her team is they're very emotional. They expect a certain degree of empathy and compassion. And her personality is very much like, I hired you to do a job, come in, get the job done. And so we have to find ways to bring those together, because neither one is wrong. And we have to stop making other people wrong in order to be right. And so we have to find a way. What is the way that I can take my natural gifts and strengths and personality and interpret them just like you would if you were speaking another language? How do I interpret it so that my team can understand and receive that information? And that's all it is. It's not that you have to change who you are. It's not that all of a sudden you have to roll over and just, give in and be the doormat. But how do we phrase something in a way that someone else can hear it? And so that comes with different cultures, different personalities. Even if you were born and raised in the same town, in the same city, you probably still have very drastically different personalities. And so we have to look at our team and understand, who are the people on my team? What do they need from me in order to be their best self? And what do I need in order to become the leader that they can respect and listen to and trust? And at the end of the day, it really is we all want the same thing. We want to be seen. We want to be valued for the work that we bring to the table, and we want to be respected. And if we can keep those three things at the forefront, we'll go much further in having constructive conversations versus ones that deplete us, ones that create animosity, ones that drive wedges between us.
Yeah. And this is the last, like, philosophical kind of question. What about I think the real logistical issue for that women face that men don't have to face is motherhood. The
Mm-hmm.
prime years for a woman to get pregnant, have kids, is also the prime years you would be building your career, which gets in the way. And then if you have to step away, and I think luckily in some states they're starting to even that out a little bit. But how much do you see that as an impact of like women maybe leaving the workforce or like shifting hours down so they get less exposure and less training and less opportunities?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that I've experienced. I've had a wave of clients who specifically left corporate when they became mothers because they were like, I can't do this grind. It's not supporting the life that I want to live, to be there with my children. But they still want to find value outside of motherhood. And I think that's so important for us to recognize and to call out, is that just because a woman becomes a mother doesn't mean that that becomes her whole world. She is a multifaceted person, just like she was before motherhood. And on the reverse side of that, just because a woman doesn't choose to become a mother doesn't mean that she just wants to be a workaholic and be tied to her desk all day long. And so a lot of times we see, especially in corporate environments, we'll see the non-mothers picking up the slack for the mothers and then becoming resentful. And then the mothers aren't getting the support they need and they become resentful. And now we have, this mass exodus of women on all sides of the coin who are starting their small businesses and trying to create something differently. And unfortunately, the only example they've had of running a business is the current model that we have in the US. And so a lot of times they end up replicating what they've seen, and they're trying to find a way out. They're like, how do I create a business that's different? And so a lot of times we're having conversations around, what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you could do whatever you wanted for your business? And so it's kind of deconstructing some of that culturally ingrained work structure in the way that we think about our work, our worth, how many hours we need to work a week, what a successful business looks like, what a successful team looks like, what kind of benefits you'd like to offer without cannibalizing your business, because that's part of the conversation, right? We want to have people-centered businesses, but we also need to have profitable businesses so that we can maintain and that we can build the team and the life that we want. So it's very complex. There's a lot of different sides to that story that we could really take off there, Chris.
Yeah, let's start with what you just said there last, because that's the more logistical stuff, and then we'll move into like the people stuff. How do you find women find that balance of profitability and people centered? Like, how do they manage that? Because I think that's the lesson every business owner has to learn is, oh, I can't just be all people centered. I have to actually make a profit also.
Yes. I always tell people, start small. You're not going to be able to create the type of company benefit plan or structure that you want right out of the gate. It's just unrealistic to think that. But what can you start with today and then build on? And so I often tell my clients, okay, what's the big dream? What are all the things that you would love to offer in the future? And then let's work backward from there. What can we offer now? What makes sense with your budget, with your finances, with your marketing, with the team that you currently have? Because some of it too is, oh, I'd love to offer XYZ. And I'm like, well, you only have 2 employees. You don't really need to offer X, Y, and Z. And so part of it is allowing yourself to have the big dream of what that looks like, and then scaling it back to where you are now and building the plan for the future. Because that also gives you something fun to work towards, something exciting. You can share it with your team to say, hey, as the business grows, these are the things that we're going to be adding. When we hit this revenue mark, when we hit that revenue mark, when we hit this milestone, these are the things you can look forward to. And that helps to get your team excited and involved and participating in building something that's bigger than just, hey, I come to work every day, I clock in, I do some things, and I go home. So we can really build culture within that vision of building a business that looks different than what you came from.
Do you find that to be a common trap for women business owners? They're often thinking like 10 steps ahead and not kind of what stage they're in currently.
Yes. I've unfortunately worked with several clients who weren't paying themselves when we started working together because they were so sacrificial in wanting to give everything to everyone else. And I'm like, listen, if you're not paying yourself, that's not sustainable. If your business isn't making money, that's not sustainable. And one day, eventually, you're going to have to close your business, and then you're not helping anyone. And sometimes you have to say the hard things to be able to hear it and to say, I don't want that to happen. Okay, let's create a better plan, and let's really take care of people where you are right now. And it may
Mm.
not look like exactly what you want. And we may have to scale some things back. And that's why I always say start small, because it is absolutely the worst to have to take a benefit or to take, a privilege or something away from someone than it is to excitedly
Yeah.
offer them something.
Yeah. I'm curious, what have you seen
Mhm.
as like the traps that women are facing in the way they're approaching it versus the men?
Yeah, I think women have a really hard time of having healthy boundaries
Mm.
and not feeling mean about them. And that leads to people having full unfettered access to them, which means that they're being interrupted constantly all day long and they can't focus and
Mm.
get more strategic or high level work done. They struggle with policies, which is kind of similar to boundaries, but boundaries are personal. Like I'm setting this time aside to work on this important project that I need to get done. No interruptions, please. Versus a policy. How do we manage time off? How do we request time off? How much do people get? How do we, implement it? And so anything along having some kind of rules, boundaries, stations, that's a really big challenge for women because a lot of times we're kind of taught to be the peacemakers. We're taught to be the
Mm.
ones that are very accessible. We're here to help. We want to take care of people. We're nurturers. And so that infiltrates our ability to make smart business decisions and to be strategic in the way we use our time, the way we structure our businesses, the way that we enforce those policies. Because again, the words we use are important. If I tell you, you got to enforce this policy, it sounds mean. It sounds punitive, right? A lot of times when we talk about accountability, we're like, well, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to make you justify why you did XYZ or why you didn't do
Mm.
XYZ. None of that language resonates with most women in the way that we're socially conditioned. And so we
Mm.
have to think about ways to reframe those to say, it's not a boundary. It's my structured CEO time where I'm focused on strategy for the business. That's so much more empowering, right?
Mm.
It's not a punitive policy. It's the rules of the game so that we all know how to play and nobody's feelings get hurt.
How do you encourage women to lean into those conversations around boundaries, accountability, performance
Mhm.
in a way? Because I think I find that a lot of people in general just they struggle with having that empathy. They care about the
Mhm.
people. They want to do that people pleasing, and they misinterpret assertiveness as I need to be aggressive about this, which
Mm,
is it's not. But how are you helping them conceptualize and approach it in a balanced way?
yeah, I think, I love always talking about the difference between assertive and aggressive and giving clear examples of what that looks like. And even doing, some examples with them like, okay, is this sentence assertive or aggressive? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It all sounds scary. And I'm like, no, that's clearly
Mm.
aggressive. If it's scary, it's aggressive. Okay. But I also think it's important, as I mentioned a moment ago, the language that we use. And so instead of saying, oh my gosh, I have to have a hard conversation with this team member about them taking the day off and not letting anyone know, it's okay, maybe we need to have a clarity conversation. Something was unclear here. There was a
Mm.
missing policy. We didn't communicate it effectively. Maybe this team member's new and we didn't do effective training with them. So instead of approaching it as, I have to go have a bad conversation with someone, I need to check in and see maybe where did I play a role in that breakdown in communication? Because I always talk about the Pareto principle, right? Like 20% of your people cause 80% of your problems. The unfortunate part is that you might be part of the 20% right now through lack of clarity, lack of expectations,
Yeah.
thinking you communicated something when you didn't, or you didn't communicate it effectively for the people that are on your team. So a lot of reframing around like, let's stop saying hard conversations and difficult conversations and start looking at them. Is this a clarity conversation? Is this a collaborative conversation? Because a lot of times I think we come into these conversations as it's a me against them. And really it's a we against the problem.
Hmm. You asked a great question. What role did I play in this?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what you've seen. I hear a lot of people already have like a lot of guilt or shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so how do you help them honestly just reflect on like, hey, I'm contributing to this problem also
Mm-hmm.
without like shaming them or having them feel even more
Yeah.
guilty than they may already do?
Yeah. Yeah. Sharing personal stories and moments where I fell flat on my face as a leader is usually a good icebreaker. Humor's always a good icebreaker for me. I'll be like, okay, now, are you maybe doing this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, are you sure? Let's look at this a minute. And so I
Hmm.
think like approaching it with just my natural personality, my gifts of clarity and empathy and compassion and humor allows me to break through some of those moments where it can feel very, very shame filled and very guilty. And also reminding them, you did the best you could with the skills that you had. Nobody taught you how to do this. Nobody's taught you how to have a hard conversation in a way that feels really values aligned for you. And we do a lot of values work with my clients. That's the starting point for me, because if I can take you through a conversation founded in your values, you're going to walk away from it feeling so much better about how you showed up in this world today. And that for me is the thing at the end of the day. At the end of every day, can you say, I showed up in alignment with my values and I was a better me today than I was yesterday?
I love that. Were you always comfortable with difficult conversations?
There definitely was always a spark of, I'm not one to shy away from a good fight. But I have learned how to hone that ability to have an effective conversation. And I think there's a difference between people that have hard conversations because they enjoy the fight. They like to be right. I never heard necessarily about being right, but I wasn't afraid to speak my mind and give you my 2 cents. And there's a way that you have a conversation where you can walk away and everybody's dignity is intact. And that is the part of having difficult conversations or tackling difficult conversations head on that I've honed over the years, because I was not afraid to say whatever it was I was thinking, but it wasn't always constructive.
Thanks for sharing that. That's the end of part 1 of our episode with Ashley. Stay tuned for next week.